Now we're going to talk about starting the engine prior to the flight. Like with any other phase of flight, we want to use our checklist. We're going to start with our before starting engine checklist. So our pre-flight inspection is complete. We're finished with that. We're going to check, make sure our seat belts are on and tight. Okay. We want to make sure our fuel selector valve is on both. We have 2 tanks of fuel. We can turn them on either side or off. We want to make sure that that is up and on, so that's on both tanks. All right. We make sure that our avionics power and our electrical system is all off. We don't want to start the engine with any electrical power on so that we don't overload any of our radios. So we want to make sure that our avionics power switch is off and that all our electrical, except for this beacon, is on. We leave this beacon on to indicate to anyone on the ramp that we're starting our engine. Okay. All right, we want to test our brakes. The brakes are on the rudder pedals down about your feet. And their brake pedals are actuated by pushing your toes. So pushing forward with your toes will actuate your brakes. There's a brake on each wheel. We also want to check our circuit breakers just to make sure that nothing is popped open so that all our electrical equipment is functioning properly. All right, now we'll start the engine. We're going to make sure our mixture is rich. This controls the amount of fuel going to the engine. So we're going to make sure that's full forward or rich so we have the most fuel going to the engine. Next thing we want to make sure is our carburetor heat is cold. So this plunger should be in for a carburetor heat. Okay. The master switch will come on. That's this red switch over on this side. So this puts electrical to the aircraft. Next thing we're going to do is prime. We're going to take this plunger, pull it out, and what we're doing is atomizing fuel directly into the engine cylinders, into 2 of the cylinders. This will aid in getting the engine started. Close that and lock it. Give it a tug to make sure that it is locked. Okay. Now we're going to put the ignition key into the ignition. We're going to hold the brakes. We're going to keep our eyes outside. We're going to clear the propeller area to make sure no one is standing near the engine. We call clear prop. Hand on the throttle, feet on the brakes, and we'll go ahead and turn the key to start the engine. Okay. Of course, it's not going to start on the first time. Make sure our brakes are set. Make sure our cabin doors are closed and locked. So we'll verify that those are locked. We'll go ahead and bring the window closed and lock it. Okay. All right, so now we're going to check our flight controls. Make sure that we have freedom of movement on those flight controls. So the ailerons left and right. We're going to go ahead and pull up, and then when the aileron is over to the left, we want to make sure that that aileron is up and down, up and down. And also with the elevator, we'll take a look back behind us. Where that elevator goes up and down. Check those rudder pedals too. Make sure that they have freedom of movement and that the rudder is moving slightly. Okay, then we're going to do an engine run-up. We're going to check to make sure that the engine is working properly. We're going to increase our throttle about 1,700 RPMs on the RPM gauge or tachometer. We have 2 sets of spark plugs in this airplane, so we're going to check one and then the other. So we're going to take one. We should have a drop in RPM, about 100 RPM or so. Then put it back on both systems, make sure that it recovers. Then we'll go straight over to the right, make sure we have a similar drop, put it back on both, and make sure it comes back to about 1,700 RPMs. While we're there, we're also going to bring on the carb heat. Puts warm air into the carburetor in case we get any kind of icing condition. We're going to make sure that we have a slight drop in RPM when we do that. While we're there, we'll make sure we have a suction gauge that it's in the green arc. Make sure our fuel quantity is reading full. Our oil temperature and oil pressure are within the green to make sure that those are where they're supposed to be. And our ammeter, which is an idea of how much our battery is charging. We're going to go ahead and make sure that's on, and then we're going to snap that off, take the alternator offline to make sure that we'll get a drop in our amps, and also a warning light that if we lose our alternator in flight and we're just running off the battery, we'll know that. It's back on. Okay. And then we're going to bring the power, or reduce the power all the way to an idle setting to make sure the engine still runs at idle. We'll bring it back up to about 1,000 RPMs. And our pre-flight run-up is complete. We'll do our before takeoff checklist, and we'll make sure that our wing flaps are up. Those are all the way up. Carburetor heat is in the cold position, or full forward. And once we get on the runway, we're going to go throttle full open, so full throttle. We're going to increase our back pressure, or lift that nose at about 55 knots on our airspeed indicator. And then we're going to climb at about 75 knots on the airspeed indicator. So we've reviewed that, we're ready to take the runway. All right. St. Charles traffic 6343 Delta is moving into position for departure. Runway 27 will be a right turn out to the north, St. Charles. Okay, you ready? Ready. A little bit of a tailwind. We're going to use the entire runway. We're going to come out here and turn around and line up using the most distance of the available runway. Using our brake and our pedals to make a nice tight turn and line up right on the center line of the runway. Come to a complete stop. Double check all our engine instruments are working properly. Our heat, trim is set, flaps are up. We're going to increase the throttle to about 2,000 RPMs. Again, checking the engine instruments, making sure that our directional gyro is set with our runway heading, that our control surface is properly. Using our stay on that center line. So we're going to show it here. Okay, which we do have. Airspeed is alive. About 55. Lift the nose. Fly right off. We have a bit of a crosswind from the left today, so our nose is pointed out a bit to the left. Much like crossing a river in a canoe. Continue to fly at a runway heading until we're at a safe altitude. Good thing to do is to go ahead and put the cowling itself, the top of that nose out here, right about even with the horizon in the distance. That is going to give you about 75 knots on your airspeed indicator, and what's called our BY climb, our best rate of climb.